Hello and welcome to Zero Hangers Trade Target Series for 2024. In our latest episode, we'll be covering North Melbourne and what they could look to be doing come the trade and free agency space. And to go through 5 potential trade targets for the Roos is Aidan Cellini. Aidan, how are you, mate?
Good, thank you, Mitch. How you going?
I'm very well, very well. Keen to get into this because North Melbourne are such an intriguing, club in where their list strategy sits. They've gone to the draft for so many years, and as much as they would love to bring in top line talent, they've certainly made it noted that has been a bit of a struggle for them to lure free agents and the like, given where they've sat on the ladder and that they can't exactly show that a premiership is around the corner just yet. But you'd like to think that they are building, and that we have seen some signs this year. So you're probably not looking at the top bracket of players who are available this year, but we have looked at just about, I think 4 out of the 5 are uncontracted, so but certainly attainable. Probably wouldn't cost too much budget-wise, and certainly could just be a couple of helpful pieces like they did with getting Zach Fisher and Dylan Stevens last year. Hopefully can look to do the same this season. But before we get into the names, what do you kind of see North Melbourne, where they're at, what we've seen from this year, and what do you think they can be looking to do over the off-season and for the years to come?
Yeah, I mean, clearly they're in a bit of a rebuild phase, but as we've seen in maybe the last 6 weeks, we're definitely post-buy. The young talent that's coming through seems to be very exciting. It's just a question of just keeping them together for as long as possible. I like to liken them to the Hawthorn of the 2004 era when Clarkson first came in. There was clearly teething problems when they went to the draft and used the draft in kind of a heavy space there. And 3 or 4 years, they brought in all this gun talent, but it obviously takes a little bit of time for 18, 19-year-olds to get going. And, as we know, the rest is history with Hawthorn winning a 3-peat as well as that 2008 flag they kind of stole. Now, I'm not saying North Melbourne are going down a similar path, but I mean, with Clarkson at the helm and then also getting these young guys in and getting games into them and getting them playing together, a bit of familiarity, it does help in the long run, I believe. And, I think maybe the next year or two, do look at still heading to the draft with an aggressive hand. But also, as you mentioned, those Zach Fisher types, the Dylan Stevens types, are ones that aren't overly expensive, but do have a role to fill in the North Melbourne side. I think that's, kind of that dual, I guess, system base, bringing in acquiring players is the way to go in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I think for North, as they've flagged before as well this year, is maybe getting some experience in. So it's going to be, at the very end of their career that can offer just some guidance, some mentorship that aren't going to cost them, large amounts in their draft capital. And then I think some small forward options, whether it's a pressure forward or it's just some of these ground level threats that they could potentially look at. So let's dive into the list. And one of them is on the more experienced side, a name that I think many have probably thought might be a good option if they are to, get someone in who's been around the traps long enough, has some great experience, has been, fairly reached high peaks in his career. And that's Travis Boak, who still playing some great footy at Port Adelaide. I think he's bounced back after probably a harder year last year and is holding down a nice role, whether that's through midfield or on the wing or at half forward. So I think he still has some value. And I don't know why North probably wouldn't ask the question, try and bring him in, potential coaching role, post-career as well under Alistair Clarkson would be quite comfy as well. And obviously he's from Victoria, so he might already be considering a move. He's obviously been in South Australia for some time, but there certainly could be a lure if North Melbourne can kind of come to the table.
Yeah, I mean, I like this type of option, those experienced players who can do more off-field good than potentially on-field. I know Travis Boak is still performing at a high level for the Power at the moment, but what he can do off-field, you hear stories of taking young guys, especially Port Adelaide guys, overseas on training camps, and you can see them return the following year, at the peak condition and playing at a high level, such as Jason Horne-Francis, for example. So to have a guy of Boak's caliber with the likes of, the Wardlaws, the Sheasels, even Davies Uniacke, it can add so much value off field, which then ideally then translate on field. And I think, Boak is definitely one of those options in the AFL at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's someone like Ben Cunnington they would have loved to have had on their list for a couple more seasons. Obviously not the case, just given his plans to retire, but Boak certainly could fit that kind of mould if he was to cross over to Arden Street. Next on name, we'll stick with the experienced types, and it's probably not a name that Roos fans might be all too keen to hear that there might be a trade target for him or not, but I feel like Jack Darling at West Coast is another who can bring premiership experience, almost 300 games of experience, one of the best goal kickers the Eagles have ever had. Obviously, he gets a fair few knocks on him, just given for form and some output, but the numbers speak for themselves, and I think that given the lack of support they have for Nick Larkey and the lack of veteran experience they have in the front half, Jack Darling might be worth the question.
Yeah, Alistair Clarkson went on record saying they'd rather get a key forward in than a key back. I'm not sure he definitely meant an experienced key forward, but as you alluded to, Darling, if he were to come and cross to North Melbourne, does add that experience. I think his time at West Coast, he's probably almost been squeezed out with the form of Jake Waterman and then the return of Oscar Allen, who looks like he's going to be an absolute gem for them for so long. So it's clear that Nick Larkey does need assistance. They've brought in Bryn Teakles, a mid-season recruit who's serviceable, but again, just another layer of experience and assistance down forward can only be of benefit to North Melbourne. As we know, we don't really expect too much of them on a week-to-week basis, but more just the effort and I guess the intangibles, which again, someone of Darling's experience and caliber can bring. Some
more kind of forward assets in this, as we flagged earlier, probably more of the medium or smaller size. So Matt Owies is one at Carlton, yet to have a contract for next year. Certainly viewed as gettable, it seems, given that the Blues are trying to just get their salary just right, so they make sure that they can re-sign the likes of Jacob Wiedering next year, and Tom DeConing's also off contract, Sam Walsh the year after that. And they've already got long-term deals for the likes of Patrick Cripps, Charlie Kerner, Harry Mackay. So it is going to be a pretty tricky task for the Blues, and it opens the door for other clubs to ask the question of some of their players who don't have contracts for next year, and Always is one of them. He's been their third best goal kicker this year behind Kerno and Mackay, really having a career best season. But yet to cement his future. And I think North could come with a deal that would likely edge out Carlton's. And it's just up to him whether he wants to stick around Princess Park and potentially contend for a flag. And look, if they do that this year, which is certainly a chance, they might even open the door for him to consider maybe more lucrative deals elsewhere. But obviously he'd have to weigh up, going back down the bottom of the ladder with North Melbourne and looking to build up again. So difficult decision on his end, you'd think. I think you'd like to stay with Carlton, but if it's on the monetary side of things, certainly could be getting better offers elsewhere.
Yeah, as you alluded to, it's kind of going from a premiership contender to probably one that's not going to be around the mark for maybe 3 or 4 years, for argument's sake. So it would have to take some sort of deal to pry him out of Carlton, but it has been happened before. Zach Fisher probably looked like he was comfortable at Carlton, but then a bigger offer and a longer deal with more security at North Melbourne got him across to Arden Street. So it could be in a similar bracket. They do have a heap of small forwards, Carlton. I know they're probably missing one X-factor one, but Matt always seems to bob up with 2 or 3 goals a game. And as you mentioned, he's the third goal kicker behind 2 of the best goal kickers in the game at the moment. So he's definitely one to watch in terms of where he may end up if he does potentially leave the Blues at the end of the year.
Another one who's unsigned beyond this year, but is a free agent and a restricted free agent at that, is Ben Ainsworth, who I think he's probably been on in this series a couple of times, just given where the medium to small forward market has kind of shifted. Will Hayward re-signed, Tyson Stengel re-signed, and if the Roos are in the market for a small, maybe half forward, Ainsworth is going to be, I think, one of the better ones on offer. As mentioned, a restricted free agent though, so it does come with a stipulation that if the Roos lose Cam Zerha and want to get Ainsworth, that any draft compensation that they get will be impacted, given that when you get compensated for losing a free agent and you sign another one, that compensation does get pushed back a little bit and impacted. So have to be a tricky one. If they can keep Zerha and get Ainsworth, that's a big win-win for them, and be a nice couple, 2-punch knockout for them in that front half and is at half forward.
Yeah, I guess it's similar to the Owies conversation. Ainsworth is probably right on the cusp, as is the Suns, of playing finals for the first time. He's been there, I think, since the 2017 season, got drafted in 2016, I believe. So he's almost done the hard yards in terms of where the club has been, and I think it's almost his 8th year, as you mentioned, being a free agent. So definitely hit that mark and would then have to then go back down to a club that wouldn't be in contention. So that's something you'd weigh up. Would it be potentially more money out of North Melbourne? That could be the case, but playing finals football, I think, is something definitely on his radar, and I think the Suns' radar. So it would be an interesting one to see if they do weigh it up. But if you're North Melbourne, you definitely ask the question. Now,
another Sun who's probably in a different position because he's not a best 22 player. He hasn't probably been able to hold down that role for a couple seasons now, but when he was one of the best pressure forwards in the game, you'd think, and that's Darcy Macpherson, and probably someone who isn't spoken about all too much. He's currently off contract for next season, and he actually had interest from North Melbourne a couple of years ago, but I think he was under contract then, and a deal fell through. So maybe they rekindle their interest. Certainly needs more opportunities elsewhere. And you'd certainly get them at North Melbourne, you'd think, if they're kind of looking to add a pressure forward who can still, add in a goal a game and kind of help on the defensive end of that front third.
Yeah, he's one of those Suns players that are dominating at VFL level, but just can't seem to get a look in under Damien Hardwick. And that doesn't mean he's not at AFL level. It's just, I guess the lineup that they do have. And up until this week, Ben Ainsworth probably took that position in front of Macpherson, which means, again, it's probably a player, like you mentioned, is gettable. And probably doesn't come at too much of a cost, given the fact that, he's probably not seen as the Suns as maybe their primary small forward or pressure forward. He does come in and fill a role when needed, but that's usually pretty rare. So again, someone that's North Melbourne should look at just in terms of getting him into the club and getting him invested and then seeing them, into the future for the next 3 or 4 years into their rebuild.
Yeah, well, he's been with them since 2015, so he'd have to be a free agent as well. So he's not going to cost them anything, certainly not restricted. So no draft capital needs to be handed over, and it might be a pretty easy move for the Victorians. So yeah, just another name I think the Roos certainly could consider if, like I said, the market this year is lacking across most areas of the field, and you can't be expecting to get big names in, but I think it's not a bad couple of names for North Melbourne, who will probably take most focus to the draft this year. All right, that wraps up our North Melbourne episode for our 2024 Trade Target Series. We'll cover Port Adelaide next, and obviously you can catch up on all the other clubs on our YouTube channel and on zerohanger.com.